Hello and welcome to the Fault Line. We're excited to share with you an episode today where we have Kate McKinnon and Sara Bradley joining us, and we're talking about the shift from athlete to leader in an organization. Gary, you hosted this episode, and I was reflecting on it. I was specifically interested in Sara commenting on how she got immediate feedback as an athlete and how that was something that she was missing in the leadership roles that she's held since.
Yeah, for me, I was thrilled as I went back and reviewed the conversation that we had by some specifics like that availability of direct feedback for performance improvement that so many athletes get from coaches and reviewing the game film, etc. I was also struck as I reviewed things through the whole conversation of the nuances where there are bridging elements between being athletically competitive and then working in a corporate environment, whether that's the performance feedback that you just touched on, or team dynamic, or leadership. And I think for all of our listeners, whether you were a high-level athlete or not, there are going to be elements of this that are going to ring true to your own experience, your own transitions between companies, between roles, between teams, that are going to be valuable. So let's not talk about it anymore. Let's get right into that conversation. Hi, and welcome to The Fault Line. Today we've got Sara and Kate with us, and I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves before we dive into our topic of the day. So, Kate, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Gary. Kate McKinnon. I am the founder and chief people officer of Kate McKinnon HR Solutions. I work with clients on HR strategy, executive coaching, and leadership development, and then coach individuals in transition. So new grads, former athletes, and veterans.
Great, Sara.
Yeah, my name's Sara Bradley. I have about 11 plus years of experience in the HR space as well. Currently supporting small and medium-sized organizations and companies in the Pacific Northwest, and operating in the HR consultant space.
That's great. And for anybody who has been a listener of the Fault Line, Kate is a return guest. Sara, we're very appreciative of having you here. And Kate, you touched on this in your introduction. We're going to talk a little bit today about transitions. And for me, it's a topic that most of us deal with through the arc of our careers, transitioning from being an individual contributor to managing a team, transitioning from one organization to another, adjusting to new managers or new leadership styles, etc. But we have also a particular focus today that I think is an interesting one when we talk about people who come out of a very competitive space, elite athletes, or even not so elite athletes, but people who've put their identity into some of that purpose and that focus, and then have to figure out what the rest of life looks like. And I don't want to take too long a turn here, but I think what I'll do is just kick it over to you, Kate, to hear a little bit about how you came to helping people in these transitions. And then we can start to dive into what some of the realities are and how people then succeed on the other side.
Yeah. Thank you. And you're right. I think transitions in every part of life is just a very common thing, but people just aren't naturally equipped to deal with change. And so change is hard. Even positive change is hard. And so my most recent position was the head of HR for Playflight Sports. And so a lot of athletes coming into the organization, did some work with the Black Student Athlete Summit as well. And, in an organization where you have a lot of former athletes, they bring all of the wonderful skill sets that you would expect: competitive, team-oriented, very, very good at receiving feedback and applying that feedback. But I was finding that, there was still some real gaps around what did the organization was able to do to support them as they came out of that journey. And also just their own personal identities being in question as they transition away from sport and into something that is very foreign in the business world. I'm very passionate about helping new grads, helping athletes, and helping veterans in these really pivotal times in their life where they're sort of entering a new phase of their professional development. And so, how to really help them do that successfully.
Sara, I can see you nodding your head. Talk a little bit about your own journey and give us a little context there.
Yeah. Well, I was a collegiate athlete. I played softball here in Oregon. And as Kate mentioned, and as you did, Gary, the transition from really being a full-time athlete and student into the workforce was, a challenge that I wasn't anticipating or ready for. And when I look back on it, it's been quite some time now. I'm a bit older, but it felt chaotic. I felt unprepared. Um, really uncomfortable. Um, and to your point about, a lot of athletes, I think there's a sense of purpose, right? They are working towards their craft and chipping away at making themselves a little bit better every day for hours at a time. And when that is, somewhat abruptly removed from your day to day, it's really challenging to understand who you are and what you should do next and where do you put, these passions that you may have. So it was certainly a challenging time in my life.
Oh, I can imagine. In preparing for this discussion, I was reflecting on my journey. I was a college athlete. I played ball briefly in Europe after college. And I'm now the dad of 3 former college athletes as well. And there were a couple of things that started to bubble up for me, and I'm curious to get both of your reactions to this. In an athletic sense, there's a clear delineation between preparation and competition, right? We prepare for this time, and then there's this defined parameter, like for the next 90 minutes, we're going to compete hard. And winning is clearly defined as well. It is explicit. There's a score. And one of the biggest shifts in coming out of that kind of cadence of, hey, I spend 5 or 6 days preparing, then I compete, then I rest, then I prepare, then I compete, is in most organizations out in the quote unquote real world, preparation and competition are happening at the same time. And the ability to know whether we're winning or have won is also a continuous thing. It's a running ticker rather than a result that gets celebrated and then, we sort of reset. And I'm wondering if that resonates or if maybe I've mischaracterized something from each of your experiences.
Sarah, I'll let you go.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. I think, if I relate it back to softball and a game, there's a scoreboard. We know at the end of, 7 innings who's won, how we performed. And I think as an athlete going into a corporate setting, you don't necessarily get that immediate feedback. You don't necessarily know how you performed. You might not hear it until the end of the quarter. And so it can be really challenging to know what you need to work on. I think I've also, certain times in my career, there's been a lack of confidence because, maybe I haven't had a leader who gave a lot of feedback or coaching or really shared, how I was doing and how I could perform better. And again, we don't have that live scoreboard to really tell us where we're at and how we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's funny for people who are non-athletes, sometimes getting, into their heads this idea of there's video replay, there's game film, there's direct feedback. Performance is more than ever these days analyzed and put through an analytic process. And that's really daunting for a lot of people because they sort of struggle with how explicit that is. I think the flip side is for many athletes, you get addicted to that kind of feedback for improvement. And then you show up, and I can see Kate nodding on this. You show up in a corporate environment and people will say, yeah, you did a good job. And you're like, yeah, but what could I improve? And they're like, I don't know, you did a good job. And so there's also this sort of anxiety that bubbles up. And, I'm curious, Kate, how do you help people with that? And Sara, I saw you nodding as well. I'd love to get each of your perspectives on that one. We'll start with you, Kate.
Yeah, I think it's the recognition that when you're a student athlete, you have so many people around you helping you get better day in and day out. There is just such a laser focus on your performance, on improving your performance, and everybody is sort of geared towards helping you achieve that. And when you go into a corporate setting, there's almost this like, here's your goal. Let me know when you've gotten there. And there's just no continuous feedback loop during that entire process. It's either you get there or you don't, and it's very subjective. And I think that that's really, really challenging for people that are coming out of athletic backgrounds. I think number one, when you're interviewing, when you're hiring somebody, understanding how they like to receive feedback and explaining how you provide feedback. It was really interesting. Sara and I have worked together in two separate organizations, and I very much like to be led in a way where somebody gives me the final, like, this is what I expect from you, and I just figure out how to get there. And so I naturally tend to lead my teams in the same way. And I remember having a conversation with Sara, and she said, hey, can you give me some actual feedback, please? Because this, like, any way you get there just doesn't really resonate with me because I need a little bit more. And I think having those open dialogue moments with your leadership and your teams is really, really critical to make sure that you're setting people up for success.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in there and acknowledge something that you just touched on, which is being open to how different people want to receive the feedback and will be able to act on the feedback. And that flexibility as a leader is fundamental to success. Anytime you're managing more than one person who does it exactly the same way you do, you've got to be able to sort of find that sort of bridging capability and that resonance to help the team move forward.
Yeah, I think another piece to this, and Kate mentioned this. Her and I have worked together for a long time, and she probably is the person that knows me best, in the professional setting. And our relationship has grown, and I think initially, when I'd say, "Hey, I need some more structure or more feedback," she'd give that to me, and the last couple of years, as I've grown, she has also pushed me to move forward in a way where I may not need all the things in place or all the details or all the structure, and to really believe in myself. So I think it's this, like you're mentioning, this back and forth relationship of really getting to know each other, and when to push an athlete or former athlete a little more and say, hey, rely on your past experience and your skill set. You got this. So just wanted to mention that, very helpful from my perspective in that way that Kate led.
Love it. Love it. I'm also curious, and Sara, you started to tease this, and I'll start with you, but as a former athlete, what are some of the attributes that you were able to bring into corporate environments and leverage? Because we've talked about some of the difficulty in the transition, but there's a reason that some organizations seek out people who are part of teams or part of competitive groups. I'm curious from your experience what you've been able to most leverage and find applicable that's been differentiating or help build your path to success.
Yeah, well, I don't want to harp on this too much, but I think a positive thing for me that I've certainly brought into the workplace has been the coachability piece, and relating it back to feedback. It's something I need and want, and when I receive feedback, I'm able to immediately implement that into my work. And I seek that out to make myself better every single day, to work at my craft, to try to do the best I can within um, my work environment there. I think the other thing would be working in a team environment. And softball is a sport that's unique, where you are up at the plate as an individual contributing to the team, But you also at the same time have to rely on the folks behind you to pick you up when you need it. And so it's also a very team sport, learning your role on the team, when you need to speak up, when you need to let others fill in. And that's very much a transferable skill that we take into the workplace, working within different teams, different personalities, different skill sets, knowing like what your strengths are and what you can bring to the team and how those intertwine with the others.
That's interesting. I found, for myself, one of the best things is the idea that even when stuff goes wrong, we're going to figure it out.
Mm.
Right? Because most game plans don't go exactly the way you would have expected. There's always something that's either not working or a competitor did something you didn't expect. And that resilience has been helpful for me over the years. I'm curious, Kate, when you're coaching and supporting some of these folks who are going through these transitions, what do you remind them of that are sort of their core qualities that are going to be helpful for them as they continue to progress their careers?
Well, I think the resiliency is a big one, right? Whether you've battled back from an injury or whether you have, had a tough season or a tough game, you always kind of come back and come back stronger, hopefully, than before. And so the ability to be resilient, the ability to be creative, I think is sometimes something that's lost, and people don't see maybe athletes as being creative, but their entire athletic career, they're having to be creative, to adjust, to do things outside the box, to establish themselves uniquely in their sport, especially when they're at a high level. And so that creativity, the perseverance, that like I'm not going to quit attitude, I love to work with people like that. There are also challenging pieces to that, right? When you
Mm-hmm.
have a whole team of former athletes and they're all competitive and they're all type A and they all want to have feedback immediately, being able to really manage that is also something that's important as a leader. But there's no secret that, former athletes make incredible corporate employees, and helping with that transition is a leader's responsibility. So keeping that open dialogue and really asking people, like, what do you need from me? What can I give you? And what do you need from the team? Because everybody plays a role. And then as a team, you play a role together.
Yeah. Sara, I see you nodding on that. Go ahead. Bring the perspective.
Yeah, I just really it goes back. I mentioned this a bit, but we all have a role on the team, and I think it's important to understand what that is, but not to say that there's challenges along the way where you're learning who you are, um, in this new corporate setting. Um, and on top of not receiving, the immediate feedback and coaching that we're used to receiving, on the field, it can just feel challenging. And again, I think it goes back to having open dialogue with not only your manager but also your team members, and understanding your strengths and interests. And we were talking about this a bit beforehand, but it's a journey. And I would just say, like, don't expect to know exactly where you want to be your first year out of college or out of um your sport. It is I'm still figuring out, what I want to do for the rest of my life. So it is a journey, and enjoy it, and utilize the folks around you to help you get to that place.
It's interesting, and you touched on this a little bit, Kate. You can get groups of people who all bring their own competitive backgrounds. I think there, I'm going to bridge here to a couple of things that are in my bag of tricks. I believe that the best teams have a clear understanding of their objective or purpose, right? This is what we're trying to accomplish together, and that they build a high degree of trust. And some of the most challenging environments I've found myself in are when I've got people who maybe bring some of the attributes we just talked about, coachability, resiliency, commitment to the cause, from their athletic backgrounds, But they may all be different ones. One may be a track star. One may have been a bench, sitter, but part of a championship basketball team. A third may have played ice hockey and been pretty good. And then you throw them all into a group with people who don't have any of those experiences. And I think a big part of helping people through the process is to understand we've just created a new team with a new objective, and we each have a role to play. And I've got, an acquaintance who wrote a book years ago called Will It Make the Boat Go Faster? And trying to orient all of those members of the team towards the same objective, working in conjunction with one another is part of the trick. And I'm kind of curious, Sara, from your experience, not just personally, but as you've worked with teams as well, how you manage to help people get into that mode, because it doesn't come intuitively. Sometimes there are people who are resistant or curious or don't quite buy in. And this to me is also a distinction between some of the athletes versus non-athletes, right? A lot of the athletes can come in and, like you say, this is our purpose and this is our game plan. And they're like, got it. Now I just got to make myself the best contributor. And they almost sort of get out ahead of some of their colleagues. Is that something that you've experienced, or am I like contriving a scenario that just seems farcical to both of you?
I think in my past experience, that's certainly accurate. I think it goes back to, if we're keeping on the sports theme here, the coach you have, and is that manager or leader ensuring that the team is rowing together. And we do that by creating alignment and really ensuring that everybody knows what success looks like. And we're defining what each of those individuals are contributing to the team goal. So I think, to your point, I think athletes are always have been in a environment where we're heading towards a goal and working every day, right, to that craft and chipping away. And what can I be doing to meet that goal? So yeah, I could certainly relate with the fact that I think athletes are easier to jump into that type of environment.
I'm curious, Kate, from your perspective as well, and I think you touched on this in your introductory comments, how sense of identity plays into these transitions and plays out over the arc of an athlete's career outside of athletics. What needs to shift in that case, and how you might help them or provide some wisdom to help them with that shift.
Yeah, I think there certainly is a sense of grief that comes with individuals that lose their sense of identity, especially when they've been an athlete, whether that be on a college team, a professional level, or just have enjoyed sporting events throughout their life and playing just at a fun level. I think one of the biggest challenges is recognizing that it is truly a loss. And I think understanding that as a leader is critically important, that you're getting people that are coming from something that consumed their whole life and really being available to listen to that, to talk through that, to ask what skills they'd like to take from their athletic career into their corporate career, be supportive of that, help them stretch themselves a little bit. I think those are all things that leaders can do to help with that transition. One of the biggest challenges that I see is the frustration that you get from people that played sports at a high level when other people on the team don't contribute fully. That tends to be the biggest rub and the biggest challenge from a leadership perspective, trying to navigate those types of personality conflicts that can come from somebody who is used to contributing at a high level, who is dealing with people that maybe are not.
Yeah. Yeah. Sara's smiling on that one as well. Yeah. And it's a truism. I mean, we deal with it at different levels of athletic endeavors, right? And I think a lot of people who are in that sort of competitive space hear the talk, hey, welcome to college. You may have all been all-stars or all district players in high school, but now you're just a player, right? And it's a little bit different, I think, when you go from the competitive, athletic environment into a corporate environment, because it's not necessarily, hey, you've all leveled up and now you're the same, but it is a reset and understanding the motivations, because again, one of the harsh realities in whether it's softball or soccer or anything else is you make the team, you don't make the team. Corporate jobs don't work quite that way most of the time, right? You get people who are excelling, you get people who are specialists and contribute in a certain way, and you get a lot of people who keep their heads down and they are infinitely employable. They follow direction, they do a sufficient job, they don't have aspirations to run the company someday. And that blend is very different than on many athletic teams. And, Kate, you look like you're processing a couple of like, oh, yeah, I remember this conversation. So please dive in here.
Yeah, I think understanding the role, as Sara had indicated, understanding the role that everybody's playing is really important. But also, I think that there's a component of a corporate workforce where you have to only take responsibility for the things that you have control over, and be able to sort of, you know, phase out things that maybe you don't have direct control over. And so you see it oftentimes when someone's hired because they know somebody or somebody got them the job. And that can be really challenging for people that have worked incredibly hard to push, to craft, to train, to take and apply feedback, to see something, that maybe is looked at as being, an easy get for somebody else. And so there is a lot of that sort of level setting and almost one-on-one kind of therapy session with all of your employees, especially when you have high achievers, to say, listen, again, control what you can control. You can be the best version of yourself that you can be, and you might have control over XYZ over here, but continue to work hard, continue to push towards this goal, and you'll get to where you want to be in the future. But yes, all of the different components of a workplace, workforce, can be very, very challenging to identify. And the other thing that's hard, I was just having this conversation with someone today, is sometimes people just like people, even if they're not doing a great job. And sometimes people that are doing a great job are disliked. There's not an equivalent form of success that you get in sport, where if you're a good athlete, you're a good athlete, and that's it. It's pretty undeniable. In the workforce, that isn't always the case. And so helping navigate through those types of conversations is important.
Yeah. So, we're getting probably towards the end of our dialogue here. And this has been insightful for me and hugely helpful. I'm kind of curious, Sara, from where you are now, right? How much that experience as an elite athlete still sort of crops up in how you approach problem solving or relating or leading teams? Is it something that's still a wellspring for you, or is it sort of like tucked in the back of the closet and only comes out on special occasions?
Well, I was not an elite athlete, but I did work hard and did pretty well for myself. But it is certainly very much a part of who I am today and why I've been successful. Everything that we have discussed in the podcast, from being able to be a good teammate, knowing your place, your role on the team, being able to just work hard and being resilient. Things are changing. Learning how to fail. I think especially in the sport that I played, softball, baseball, right? It's one of the highest failure sports out there. We fail many more times than we succeed. And that is certainly something that I have been able to bring into the workplace. And not that I like to fail, but I am able to get up and still keep my confidence in challenging spaces. And so it is been a very valuable experience, and something I still hold very dear to my heart. And going back to something you said earlier, just about the grief that occurs, when you stop a sport that you've played for so many years, and one that you love, and try and figure out, what's next. I really wish there was more support for athletes in that transition. And luckily, I think there's a lot more now than there was back in my time. But when I went through it, I didn't know I was experiencing grief. And so it's great to be able to name it now, and glad I'm out of it. And there's life after being a competitive athlete, and so many transferable skills and qualities and characteristics that we can bring into the workplace.
You just spurred a thought for me, and as the person with the most gray hair in this conversation, people who come to the end of their careers go through a similar process, right? As they contemplate retirement. If your work has been a big part of your life and your identity is a part of your work, the idea of throttling back, the idea of shifting, the idea of having to deal with not having the same accountabilities, for many folks is kind of new. And the intriguing thing that you just reminded me of, both of you, is that many competitive athletes, and Sara, you're being, I think, a bit demure when you say not an elite athlete. If you played in college, you were an elite athlete. This is a very small percentage of humanity that ever achieves that. And going through that process of reflection, rework of one's identity, appreciation for what was, and embrace of what will be, is actually a skill unto itself. It can happen mid-career when, there's a downsizing or a shift in direction to the company, or a choice to change career paths. It can happen at the end of a career. But that skill unto itself is actually quite helpful. And for me, is one that I suspect gives some of the competitive athletes who've gone through it an empathy for some others in the workplace that can be a leverageable aspect as well. So I appreciate that. And I just want to reinforce, Sara, if you played in college, you were elite. Right? It's a very small percentage of people. Kate, anything that we haven't touched on, or anything where you're like, hey, I want to double down on this because it's really important for folks, whether they were athletes or not, to understand about these transitions in the workplace and as they build more and more leadership skill?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd love to double down on Sara, on what she has said, which is that, you can get through it. It really is a big transition, but there's no other way to, you can't get around it. You have to feel the feelings and then be able to move through it into your next chapter. It doesn't mean that, I've worked with athletes who say, I don't even want to talk about the sport. I can't even go back there. And then I've worked with other people that's exactly how they still identify themselves. And I'm not saying that either of those is wrong. It's just, it's your journey, and being able to come to terms with the ending of something and the beginning of another is challenging for anybody. And having more support systems around to help is so, so important, because in sport, in service, a lot of those careers end when somebody's 22, 23 years old. They have their whole life ahead of them. And so it's up to organizations, in my opinion, is up to organizations who are looking to hire people with these incredible skill sets to provide them with the tools and support that they need to be successful.
And I think a truism underneath all of that is this idea that what you've done, and it plays out over, I don't know, oftentimes between the ages of 12 and 22, right? You're a good Little League player. You don't make the middle school team. You're a good middle school player. You're junior varsity in high school. You're a good high school player. You don't make it in college. Oftentimes those choices are made for us, not by us. And it's easy to fall into kind of a bitterness about that, or to feel I was treated unfairly. And those feelings need to be processed and completed. But no matter where that boundary line is, right? And for the very best of us, and we've seen it with the Tom Bradys of the world, right? You make it to 40 before you're forced with those choices. That's still relatively early in life. And, a big part of the coaching I've done with some of the executives I coach and with members of my teams over the years has been to understand what your peak is actually entirely in your hands. It's not, I peaked then and this person ended my career, right? I can tell funny stories about when my competitive basketball days ended, and they're entertaining, but I don't view them as that was my peak and it's all downhill from here. In fact, I was just talking to one of my kids and saying, I turned 59 recently. I still don't feel like I've reached my peak. So, there's a lot more out there. And I think that's also whether you are an athlete or not, or whether, but we've almost all of us know people who are athletic. Either recognize the feelings in yourself and reach out and talk to people about it. Or if you see somebody who's struggling with this, just like with most mental and emotional challenges, reach out to them, let them know they're not alone, let them know they've got some support there. And I think for me, Kate, that's one of the joys of hearing about the work you do is you take people who, are looking at the next phase of life with some fear and anxiety, and you create a path for them that says, oh yeah, we can do this.
I try.
To paraphrase Star Wars, right? You do. There is no try. You do. So I would say thank you both. This has been a great conversation. I hope we can have you both back at some point in the future and talk about more and different themes. I think you've both got a lot to contribute on leadership and culture and achievement in a corporate sense. But it's a great start to season 2 of the Fault Line podcast. Much appreciated. And for everyone out there, we look forward to more great topics, more great guests, and more great conversation as you deal with that gap between aspiration and reality in your own jobs. Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Kate. And talk to you again soon. Take care.